Our first reading is from Genesis 32, verses 22 to 26. It's found on page 23 of the First Testament of the Pew Bibles. Here we find Jacob stopped to rest for the night on his way from the home of his father-in-law Laban to meet up with his twin brother Esau. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Our second reading continues on with our story in Genesis 32, 27 to 31. So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip.
Friends, will you pray with me? And as you feel so familiar and comfortable, I invite you to join in the second time through. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God. Amen. We come to this story of Jacob today. Now, we have stepped back from the lectionary for most of the summer, so other churches who have been following the lectionary have a little more lead up to this moment of Jacob wrestling. So I wanted to catch us up a little bit. And I never want to assume biblical literacy, because for sure when I went to seminary and we started reading the Bible, there were lots of stories that I had never heard or sort of had forgotten or didn't really have context about growing up in church. So I think it's important for us to know what is happening. There is a Sunday school curriculum and practice called Godly Play. It is based on a Montessori model of education. It was developed by the Episcopal Church, or somebody in the Episcopal Church. And there have been some churches, a friend of mine who was the pastor in Montague, Massachusetts, did this often, who started bringing it into the service and doing it as a congregation. Now, I thought about doing this with us. We don't really have a good place for me to sit on the floor with a story in front of me and have you all see what I'm doing. So we're going to sort of imagine a little bit what I have, or just imagine for ourselves the story. But always at the end of a story, there is a time of wondering. And so I will ask a few I wonder questions. You can just sort of answer them for yourself or ponder them for yourself if you want. If you have an answer that emerges that you want to share, you can feel free to sort of call it out. It is not they're not right or wrong questions. They're just things to get us wondering about the story. So we have the story of Jacob. Let's back up a little bit, back to Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah were told that they would be the parents, specifically Abraham was told that he would be the father of many. As many stars in the sky as you see will so be your descendants. The problem was they didn't have a baby. Finally, in her old age, his wife Sarah got pregnant, had a baby. That was Isaac. Isaac then married Rebekah. They had 2 sons, twins, Esau and Jacob. Esau was born just a tiny bit first. So he was first. Jacob was holding on to his heel as they came out, but that made Esau the firstborn. And at that time, especially the firstborn son was the really important son, and the one who was set to then inherit all of the belongings and property and riches, if you had them, of the father when the father died. Esau and Jacob, although they were twins, looked very different from each other. Esau was ruddy, so probably like red hair, sort of reddish skin, and very hairy. Jacob was dark hair and had very smooth skin. That is important to remember. So Jacob didn't like being the secondborn. He did not think it was fair that his brother, having been born only moments ahead of him, got all of this. So he decided to play a little trick on his brother. And one day when his brother, he was a big hunter, they were also very different in personality. And Esau was a hunter, and he was out and very rough and in the woods and dealing with the animals. And he came in having been doing this stuff, and he was so hungry. Now Jacob had very kindly made a lovely and delicious soup. Now you know when you've been doing a lot of hard work your whole day and you come into the house and you smell that food, well, your senses just leave you a little bit. And so Jacob said, "Oh, I will share this soup with you, but you have to give me your inheritance." And Esau said, "I am so hungry and that soup smells so good. You got it. I don't care. Take it. What do I need? I don't need the inheritance. It's all yours." So now Jacob has the inheritance of Isaac. Then later, Isaac was getting on in years and sort of getting a little frail and had become mostly blind. And Jacob started engaging with his mother to try and deceive his father. Because see, Esau was Isaac's favorite child, but Jacob was Rebekah's favorite child. We know that parents are not supposed to have favorites, but it says here in this story that they did. So Rebekah was sort of on Jacob's side, was like, "Yes, you're right. You deserve better than what you have as second." So they made another soup. Very good at making soup, apparently, and brought it into Isaac because Isaac had said, "Esau, go get me an animal and make a soup from it that I really like. This is this special soup that you make that I love, and I will give you a blessing." So instead, Jacob and Rebekah make this soup out of lamb because Jacob was a shepherd, and they get some animal skin, some hairy animal skin. Goat skin, yes. And Jacob goes in, and of course Isaac can't really see, and he's like, you don't really seem like Esau. And he's like, "I'm totally Esau. Look, feel my arm." And Isaac says, "I mean, yeah, Jacob's got smooth skin, and this is hairy skin, so you must be Esau. So here, I will give you my blessing." So, not only did Jacob steal his brother's inheritance, but he stole the blessing from their father. This, you might imagine, did not go over so well with Esau. He was not thrilled. He was very angry, sort of murderously angry. And so Rebekah was like, "Jacob, you got to hightail it out of here. Go see my family. Go and hang out with them for a little while and just let your brother cool off." So Jacob leaves, and on his way, he gets sort of near his mother's family, and he sees this beautiful woman at a well and falls immediately in love with her, as one does. And he finds out that it is, in fact, his mother's family that she belongs to. And so he goes to her father and he says, I want to marry this woman. This is Rachel. And he says, sure, absolutely you can marry my daughter, but first you need to work for me for 7 years. I want to make sure that you are worthy and I get something out of it, this whole thing. And so he says, oh yes, of course, absolutely I will. And so he works for 7 years. He starts really growing the flocks of Laban. And then, so 7 years goes by, says, okay, here you go, here's my daughter in marriage. Now, one thing maybe to know about this time is that women often wore veils. So he marries this woman, and then they go in the marriage tent. It's dark, they don't have lights, right? There's nothing, right? And he wakes up the next morning. It is not Rachel. He did not marry Rachel. He married Rachel's sister, Leah. He has been deceived. Laban says, you can't marry Rachel, she's younger than Leah. Once again, the younger sibling. It's a hard time. So he says, all right, I still want to marry Rachel. And he says, fine, work for me for another 7 years. So Jacob says, okay, fine, I will work for you for another 7 years. And at the end of the 7 years, he does get to marry Rachel. As you may notice, marriage and family had a little bit different structure in those days. And this was probably Jacob probably lived about 2,000 years before Jesus was born. So about as far from Jesus as we are now is Jacob living. So then they get married, and then Jacob stays another 7 years. So a total of 21 years he stays with Laban, and he grows his sheep flocks into these beautiful, wonderful, and healthy flocks. And then he hears a message from God that says, okay, Jacob, time to go. And so Jacob packs up all his stuff and all his wives and the wives' maids and the kids they've had and all the animals. I mean, it's a huge caravan group, and they start off. But he's a little worried still about Esau. So he sends some scouts ahead of him, send word that I'm coming back. And the scouts come back and say, Esau is coming to greet you. And he has 400 men with him. This makes Jacob a little nervous, because he figures, oh, he's still mad. Oh, this is not going to be good. So this is where we meet up with Jacob in this story in Genesis. He has got his whole caravan of the wives and the servants and the animals and everything, and he sort of leaves them on one side of the river and goes off by himself and ends up encountering this stranger. And they wrestle, and they wrestle and wrestle and wrestle all night long. Jacob will not give up. The stranger will not give up. Jacob gets injured. And the stranger gives him a new name. You will no longer be called Jacob, he says. You will be called Israel, which means God strives, or one who strives with God, because he has wrestled with the divine and with people. And so Jacob then does a little naming himself, and he names the place where he is, where that happened, Peniel, which means face of God. Because what Jacob realizes is that this stranger that he was wrestling with all night long is God, or is a messenger of God. He has been wrestling with the divine. And he's still injured. He goes off with a limp. Now, Jacob does end up reuniting with Esau in joy. Esau runs, sort of, okay, 21 years has gone by. We're good. We're forgiven. We're gonna get our families back together. And Jacob settles and grows his family. And eventually Isaac dies, and they sort of pass on. And Jacob is the top of the generation. Jacob has 12 sons. He also has some daughters. They get very little mention. But he does have daughters. But he has 12 sons. Jacob's sons are Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Joseph, and Benjamin. Some of you who like Broadway shows are probably singing that song in your head right now, because there's a song. If you ever need to remember all the 12 sons of Israel, just, you can sing along with them. So those sons, each of those sons, went on to form a tribe of their own. They each had a special gift and blessing, and they went on, and those were the 12 tribes of what became known as Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel. And it all started back with Abraham and Sarah and came down because of their father Jacob, who became Israel, and his children and his blessing. So that is a little brief synopsis of that story. So I wonder, in this story, what part of the story you like best. And it's okay if nobody says anything also. We can just wonder in silence. If nobody feels called to speak, that's okay. So I wonder what part of the story you like best.
It's okay to wrestle with the messenger of God.
It's okay to wrestle with the messenger of God.
I like how Jacob sees his brother and the 400 men. He says, "Oh, the servant women, you and your children go in front."
Yeah.
And then everybody bows down. And his brother says, "Hey, time for us." And that's pretty good.
It's true. Jacob does send the women and children ahead of him to maybe soften Esau toward him, just in case. He's not really going to send all the soldiers and the men against the women and the children, right? I like Jacob's creativity with the goat skin.
He's a cheater.
He is. I wonder what is the most important part of the story.
Esau forgives him.
Esau forgives him. What? Say that again. Say that louder, Rowan. I couldn't hear. That's the message of most of these stories, is forgiveness. No, yeah, because there was an extra 7. So 7 before Leah, then 7 before Rachel, and then 7 years after. So he stayed an extra 7 years after he got Rachel. Yeah, just, I don't know why. I want...
I was going to say, why the messenger? Why is he chosen? They not answer the question of why God picked them and there to say.
Why him? Why there? Why that moment? I wonder what part is about you or where you are in the story. I wonder what part is about you or where you are in the story. That one's a trickier one.
Say that even the people set up for us as prophets and the holiest ones have family problems.
Even the people set up for us as the prophets and the teachers and the holy ones have family problems that they deal with. Amen to that. I wonder if we can leave out any of the story and still have all we need. You don't think so? You need all the bits. You need the whole thing. It continues.
Isn't that kind of like life?
It is like life, this sort of up and down, and yes, and this story of this family, there's lots of stories in between the, like, you know, Jacob had 12 kids and they became the tribes of Israel. There's lots. Genesis is, I don't know, there's lots of stuff that happens. Yeah, right. Yes, I mean there's Joseph. Joseph is the most famous of Israel, of Jacob's children, right? There is the store named after him in Peterborough, and named after his coat. You're right. It's true. His robe. Well, next week when we revisit this story, we will talk a little bit more about some of the themes about forgiveness and being a cheater and a liar and still being a blessed one of God and wrestling. But I wanted to sort of just make sure we're all on the same page, and a little refresher for those of us who may have known this story. I learned it in Sunday school, and if you didn't know it, then catch up so we're all on the same page. Those I wonder questions are pretty much the standard questions that Godly Play uses with all of their stories. And so there's a lot of like, you roll out, you know, or you have a sand, if you get all the props, there's like different props, but there's a sand. And so you're in the desert and there's sand and everyone sits in a circle and you're just sort of, and the teacher doesn't actually usually look at the students, you're just looking at the story. You get really into the story, but it just invites children to really be a part of these Bible stories, and I think it's so helpful for us, for most of us as adults, some of us are children, but to really just hear these stories again, remember them, and try to imagine ourselves in the story and imagine the setting of the story. All right, so that ends our capture of the story of Jacob. So let us just take a few moments and reflect on that story.